It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Friday morning at 1 a.m. Thank you so much for staying up with us. If you're watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you could be listening to us after the fact, maybe the next morning on any of your favorite podcast platforms. In any case, please give us a like, a thumbs up, write us a nice review. That'd be terrific. Jonas, we are here to recap the Ravens' season opening loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, a rematch of the AFC Championship game. 27-20 was the final in Kansas City. I'm back here in Baltimore. Jonas is there in Kansas City. We're going to discuss what the heck happened on that final play where Isaiah Likely was mere millimeters out of bounds with one of his toes that barred the Ravens from tying this game late. We'll touch on what we saw from the Ravens' new look offense and the offensive line, Derrick Henry, the defense, how they did under first-year coordinator Zach Orr. But first, Jonas, got to give you my word of the day. It's infinitesimal. The definition, extremely small. The language of origin comes from the Latin infinitus, which I believe is second declension, which means having no limit. Infinitesimal was the margin of victory for the Chiefs tonight. It was less than inches. It was centimeters or millimeters. And what an absolute heartbreaker it was for Ravens fans.
First of all, Paul, how much will you hate me if I be a actually guy for one quick moment?
Please.
Because the difference between your pronunciation of our word of the day and the actual pronunciation of our word of the day is also infinitesimal. Sorry, I had
Is
to.
Is it really?
I had to.
My whole life I've been saying infinitesimal.
It's a 6-syllable word according to Google, which obviously is reliable. You have to trust it. But that was friggin' insane. I thought, looking at the replay when it first came down, that was one of those situations where the toe is so close to the line that it is not actually touching it. It is just like flush against it. But it wasn't the case. I didn't have the nerve to ask Isaiah Likely after the game what his shoe size was, but it feels especially relevant after a situation like that. Like maybe if he just crammed his toes into something a half size smaller, we'd be talking about the Ravens having won on a 2-pointer, lost on a 2-pointer, gone to overtime. Maybe we're not even podcasting right now because the game is still going on at 1:05 in the morning. But man, credit to Big Zay or Little Zay, whichever Zay he is, in good spirits afterward. Not really, super crestfallen, after a game like this. Obviously, he was probably the Ravens' most explosive player in a game where they had Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman. But just such a bummer for a guy who was so transcendently good tonight to have another Chiefs loss come down to him and his shoe being a half size too big.
Yeah, it was a phenomenal catch over two defenders in the back of the end zone on a play where Lamar Jackson, who played phenomenally all night long, he just heaved it up, scrambled for several seconds. There was no time on the clock, threw it to the back of the end zone after he had just missed Little Zay Flowers on a wide open, what would have been potential game tying or go ahead touchdown a play earlier. He hits Isaiah Likely in the back of the end zone, one of the tallest weapons he has, and hits him just a little bit out of bounds. What did the players, John Harbaugh, have to say about that final play?
Yeah, I mean, they were a lot like us. They thought it was a touchdown. Isaiah didn't realize that he'd landed out of bounds because it just happened so quickly. But I do have a question for you. Watching the game copy, Lamar told us afterwards, at his post-game presser, that he felt like he had to loft that ball a little bit, give it a little bit of arc, because he worried that if he just, hit Zay in the helmet with a fastball or the numbers with a fastball, it was at risk of being picked off. I don't know what kind of replays they gave you guys on the NBC broadcast, but did it look like he needed to put that ball up? Because I felt like that decision, as smart, as calculated as it might have been, probably was the difference between like Isaiah landing out of bounds and just him catching that and being already in the end zone?
It's tough to tell. I mean, it honestly looked like it still had a good amount of zip, even though it did have some arc on it. And he's stepping up forward to make that throw. He was able to set his feet. He's throwing over two defenders. So he's throwing over, I believe, Drew Tranquil, who's 6'2", and Nick Bolton, who's 5'11", into the back of the end zone. Now, we know that Isaiah Likely is one of the tallest targets he has. I mean, it's hard to tell exactly where those guys were at that moment, but I understand what Lamar is thinking because you want to make sure that he's still putting it in a place where only his receiver can get it. I don't know if that also made the difference. I mean, if that ball is 6 inches lower, does his foot land in bounds? It's hard to say.
That was the whole play. What was so weird, just looking at it right now, you have Chris Jones lining up as like a 9 tech or 11 tech. So basically as far wide as you can imagine, trying to win with a speed rush, even though Chris Jones is more power than speed. So I don't know if the Ravens had a weird line protection set up, but Patrick McCarry does not pick him up, even though he is technically lined up over right tackle. If you remember that play, it's Justice Hill who, God bless him,
did a phenomenal job.
But you think back to like if he'd had that kind of protection from Justice Hill, who is, I think, generally a good pass blocker in that AFC Championship game where he got olayed a couple times, maybe the Ravens are in the Super Bowl. And it's just, it was so weird. And to rewind it to the penultimate play, Lamar told us post game that he was actually looking for Rashad. I wasn't clear if it was initially looking for Rashad, but Rashad was running a crossing pattern. I think Lamar might have said that he expected him to sit in a zone. So only at the last moment did he see Zay Flowers streaking across the back of the end zone. Again, it wasn't clear to me initially, just trying to tweet and listen and transcribe, whether Lamar had to kind of adjust his throwing target to account for Bateman maybe not being where he wanted him to be, and Zay Flowers being there wide open. But definitely a significant development because of the fact that also on the play before that was a makeable throw, right? I know it kind of got overshadowed immediately by Isaiah Likely going down with what looked like to be a pretty serious shoulder injury, but that again had a step on his guy, had the size advantage. That's just a play I feel like where Lamar has to give his guy a chance. And I think that was, even though Lamar I think played pretty well overall tonight, considering some of the pass protection issues up front, again, they're just like situations where you are just begging him to give these guys a chance downfield, win a jump ball. I mean, that's what he did on the 49-yard touchdown to Isaiah Likely. It's a cornerback or a safety or a linebacker with his helmet turned to Lamar. Give your guy a chance. Let him make magic happen. And there were a couple situations tonight where Lamar just overshot his guy, and there was not really a chance for anything to be made play-wise on that ball.
And it's also what he did on that final drive, that long pass down the sideline to Rashad Bateman. I mean, that pass, honestly, credit to Rashad Bateman for going up and getting that and securing that inside the red zone. Lamar made a difficult throw. He's kind of on the run. He's stepping up on one foot. But Rashad Bateman had to go up and get that ball on the sideline and was able to keep his feet in bounds and land in bounds. We're left only to speculate about what would have happened if they were able to convert that. Either one of those touchdown passes would be touchdown passes to Big Zay or Little Zay at the end of the game. But the NBC broadcast did show John Harbaugh flashing two fingers. I tend to think that he would have gone for two and that we would probably not be talking about overtime. We'd be talking about the Ravens trying to maybe have Derrick Henry punch it in for the game-winning score. What do you think that play would have even looked like? First off, I assume you agree that they would have gone for two there?
I think so.
Yeah.
And you saying that John Harbaugh was signaling for two, I'd be an idiot to say that no, defiantly, the Ravens wouldn't have gone for it. Interesting to hear Derrick Henry after the game kind of sidestep some of the questions about his relatively light workload. I think he had just 13 carries tonight, and it felt like 8 of them on that opening drive. I think he was politely sidestepped a question about his diminishing role over the second half, saying like that was Monk's call, referring to Todd Monken, obviously. A a little bit of uncertainty on that, 4th and 1, where they send Ricard in motion to be a blocker at the point of attack. And I don't know if it was Chris Jones, probably was Chris Jones, because Chris Jones was everywhere tonight, who beats his block, and Derrick Henry gets met behind the line of scrimmage and has to kind of elude him to get that first down. So you would think that maybe they would have brought out like the option, and because we didn't see a lot of that tonight, a lot of it was under center stuff. But it would have been cool. Sure, would have been cool as hell. Instead, we got just like the ultimate delayed gratification celebration from the Chiefs, and the Ravens just slumping off after another brutal Chiefs loss.
Would they have even gotten the playoff without an illegal formation call being called against them? Because that was the story of the first half, and frankly,
what a transition.
The story of the game for a lot of this. Let's start with the offense and what we saw out of the gate, because this was truly the first time outside of a practice setting that we got to see this offense work together. It's the first time we got to see all 5 starting offensive linemen, and Jonas, you predicted it. Patrick McCary was starting at right tackle instead of Roger Rosengarten, although it was a rotation at right tackle. But this was the first time we saw that group together. This was the first time we saw Lamar Jackson handing off to Derrick Henry. And on that first drive, everything worked beautifully. It was gorgeous. Derrick Henry punching it in for the score on a block by Daniel Falele right up the middle. And you thought, this is what this offense could look like. And in so many ways, this game was contradicting itself, because it felt like the Ravens, up until that final drive, had such a hard time moving the ball down the field on offense. It felt like they were somewhat asleep for the first 3.5 quarters. It felt like a team that was rusty, that had yet to put all the pieces together. We didn't see it in the preseason. Say what you will about John Harbaugh not playing the starters, but we just did not see it. It was going to take some time to gel. It felt like, all right, you get down to the final stretch. Maybe the Ravens can make one final push to try to tie this thing. But the way they played all night, they probably didn't deserve to be in the game in the final drive anyway. But at the same time, you look at all the things that went against them, specifically the officiating and the ridiculous illegal formation penalties that were called against this team. And you think, maybe if just a few of those things had gone differently, the Ravens would have been trying to melt the game away in the fourth quarter, that they would have had the lead in the fourth quarter. It's hard to determine whether this was a good effort that went wasted, or just a bad game that the Ravens had no business being in the final minute anyway.
Yeah, it's going to be, we have the entire weekend to wrap our heads around this one, don't we, Paul? Because the Chiefs dropped a lot of passes. We should say that. They were definitely, the Ravens were fortunate, I think, in that first half to enter only down 7? Was it 7? 3 points? Just considering it felt like how much time that the Chiefs were spending in the Ravens minus 30-yard line. Yeah, 13 to 10. And yet, you look at the final stats, and obviously stats can be misleading, but the Ravens outgained them by 99 yards. Of course, the Ravens had more penalties, but it was just 19-yard difference. Equal in turnovers. The Ravens controlled the ball for 7 more minutes of possession, and yet, they needed a heroic fourth quarter to have this game within spitting distance. So, John Harbaugh was not exactly crestfallen after the game. He was, focused on painting an optimistic future, and I get that. But I guess is the crux of this situation is, like, should the Ravens feel optimistic that they were this, out of control in certain spots, or unfortunate, it is maybe the better word, in certain spots, to lose to the Super Bowl favorites and on paper one of the best teams in the NFL in a couple of years? Or should they have felt fortunate to even had a chance late there, considering just how ugly, the third quarter was, the first half after that opening possession was. This is a really good Chiefs defense, a really good Chiefs offense, and the Ravens at times looked much better than them, and also much, much worse.
Yeah.
And I guess the the second part of the equation works out into them losing by a touchdown here in Arrowhead.
Before we even get to Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, let's start with those illegal formation penalties, because they were the dominant storyline on that in that first half, on that opening drive. It was so strange to see a veteran like Ronnie Stanley get flagged for it multiple times. And it's clearly something that the NFL wants to change. This kind of bowed offensive line where the tackles and the guards are standing several feet behind the center. We saw Ronnie Stanley flagged for it several times. We saw the Ravens flagged for it, I believe, 3 times in that first drive, and one more time in the second quarter, and I think once or twice more in the second half. What did you hear from players in the locker room afterwards and from John Harbaugh at the podium about how they were officiating that rule, why the Ravens seemed to be the guinea pig here and not the Chiefs, and why they were getting flagged so much for a penalty that is rarely called in a game?
Yeah, I mean, poor Ronnie, who I thought will probably have this overshadow what was a really good night for him, because it felt like every guy on this offensive line, especially in that first half, took turns getting beat by Chris Jones. And Ronnie, I think, did a great job protecting Lamar's blind side. He felt, and you saw the video and shared it on our social channels, that they were inconsistent in their application of that illegal formation penalty. He acknowledged, as did John Harbaugh, that had been a point of emphasis, but obviously the difference between what Ronnie had been told during OTAs, training camp, he didn't play in the preseason, but maybe he asked some guys there, and what he experienced tonight was obviously vast. And he felt like, and he said he felt like they were out to make me a guinea pig or set an example, use me to set an example for the rest of the league. So he felt like he was doing nothing wrong. He felt like even after he got the first or second illegal formation penalty, that he corrected his gait and actually, was being more conservative to try to, ward off any potential penalties. And yet they still called it the third time and the fourth time, or just the third time. I forget how many times he got flagged. So he was very, very pissed off, very, very pissed off. And, when you see the quotes in print on the BaltimoreBanner.com, you'll see that this is a man who will probably get fined, but feels very strongly about how the officiating was tonight, because it definitely made a difference at very key spots.
It wasn't just the illegal formation penalties either. How about Steve Spagnuolo calling a timeout that he should not have been allowed to call at the end of the first half, and then laughing it off, knowing that he got away with something. The third
Us
touchdown,
old white guys all just look alike.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the referee was just, blown away by his boldness and thought, if this guy's trying to call a timeout, surely he must be the head coach, when he's seeing him out of the corner of his eye. There was also the third quarter touchdown by the Chiefs that could have been blown dead. It looked like forward progress was stopped, and then eventually the offensive line was able to overpower the Ravens' defensive line. It just felt very inconsistent. It was frustrating to watch. It feels like there's so many comparisons to be made between the Patriots dynasty going up against this Ravens, or going up against the Ravens teams during the 2000s and 2010s, and this Chiefs dynasty going up against the current day Ravens. And the same way that you felt like every single close call was going to go the Patriots' way, that's just how it feels when you're playing against the Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid Chiefs right now. I don't want to say that I don't want to blame this game on officiating, though, because that's a cop-out. I don't like to blame any
conspiracy.
Yeah, I don't like to blame any game on officiating, because this team could have played better. Let's talk about Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. How many you put in the Slack, Jonas? How many games do you think in Derrick Henry's career? We'll have to go through the game logs here. Do you think he has been outgained by his quarterback in rushing yards this significantly, outgained both in rushing yards and also in carries?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Lamar 16 carries for 122 yards. I would wager that 75% of that is scrambles.
Probably.
So Derrick, just the 13 carries for 46 yards. It was a curious decision. Obviously, Lamar has a lot of autonomy in the play calling at the line of scrimmage. He can get these, get the offense out of calls into new calls. He can adjust things on the fly. And as you can tell by how many times the clock nearly hit zero, he was very, very active with that tonight. So there were certain plays, those RPO screens, the quick hitters where Derrick Henry starts toward the line of scrimmage like he is expecting a handoff or a mesh point exchange, and Lamar throws the quick hitter to Zay or to Likely. Obviously, not really a great day for Zay. I think after the catch, he had 10 targets, 6 catches, 37 yards. So not exactly building on the performance that we saw that was so transcendent and so dynamic against the Chiefs with a better secondary in that AFC Championship game. But I don't have the stats in front of me right now, Paul, but I mean, like, would you say Derrick Henry had, 4 carries in that second half?
He had, at halftime, I believe, 8 carries for, I'm not sure exactly how much, but I believe he had 8 carries for 33 yards in the first half, which means he had 5 carries in the second half. There was a stretch. It felt like almost Todd Monken was going to hit the requisite number of carries, that he would have more carries than the Ravens did in the AFC Championship game, and then he just went away from him. Because Gianna Hahn at one point, of the Baltimore Banner, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months, did tweet out at some point in the first half that Derrick Henry had surpassed the total number of carries that the Ravens had as a whole in the AFC Championship game in January. But he had just 2 carries over the team's final 3 drives of the first half. Give credit to Justice Hill. He had a great night. Other than that great block where he was going up against Chris Jones, he had some nice catches out of the backfield. He showed off that burst. John Harbaugh said in training camp, he's like a starting caliber running back, and you saw flashes of that. And if he's going to be your RB2 for the entire season, at least until Keaton Mitchell comes back, you feel good about that. I just don't understand. I get that Justice Hill's a better pass catcher. I don't fully understand going away from Derrick Henry. I mean, Derrick Henry is great, not because he starts hot. In his career, in the first quarter, he averages 3.5 yards per carry. In quarters 2 through 4, he averages 5 yards per carry. He wears down a defense. And so he's not as effective when you give him 14 carries. He is much more effective when you give him 20 carries, 25 carries, because he wears down a defensive line. I know part of that is playing from ahead. It's easier to run the ball when you have a lead, right. But am I wrong here?
I think I would ascribe a lot of the relatively light workload to just the game script. You're not gonna, if you are taking, I'm sure that there was easy money to be had up the middle in the third and fourth quarter, especially late. But wouldn't you rather, have Lamar either be able to improvise and find something, or just, have a pass in the flat to Isaiah Likely where he can then go out of bounds and stop the clock. Again, maybe Todd Monken with his eye in the sky just did not like the kind of push that offensive line was getting. I mean, obviously the 3.5 yards per carry kind of says it all. I know, to your point, that Derrick Henry is a horse that you want to ride for as long as possible, because that Chiefs, defensive front would probably have gotten worn down. But it'll also bring up it's not just the micro of the in-game, it's the macro of Derrick Henry is better in December than he is in September. Maybe that's just because defenses in general wear down, and Derrick Henry is built different and does not wear down. But I think this was kind of sort of what I expected, given this offensive line, given how poorly it played as a run blocking unit against the Chiefs in their last game. So, obviously I'm sure people will use the Derrick Henry stat line as a cudgel to make whatever kind of point that they want to with John Harbaugh or Todd Monken or whatever. But I feel like, given the circumstances, given the fact that this was not play calling in a vacuum, it made sense to me. And, you look at that third quarter, they obviously punt on the one possession. They had just one possession in the third quarter, but to end the game, you go touchdown, field goal, almost touchdown. It's not like giving the ball to Derrick Henry would have accelerated, the decision-making process or the comeback process for those Ravens, right?
No, but I think that they could have maybe had more productive drives in the second quarter, so that they're not relying on a Roquan Smith interception to get it within 3 points at halftime. And I think maybe they could have used him more in the second quarter. And I mean, that's fair that, especially down the stretch, when you're trying to come back at that point, when it's a multi-score deficit, obviously that's when you need to throw the ball as well. And I'm not going to judge how the Ravens are using Derrick Henry on the first game. Clearly they have a plan for this guy. He is 30 years old. I know he is built different. You also do have to be careful of his workload and keep in mind that you want him at his freshest, at his best at the end of the season. And that typically is his best time. You mentioned the offensive line though, Jonas. I mean, this is a group that Eric DeCosta said that it's going to have some hiccups. It certainly had some hiccups. And the difficult part about having an offensive line that is in flux is that one mistake by one guy, you're only as strong as your weakest link on the offensive line. And one mistake by one guy can totally change a drive, can change a game. That's what we saw when Roger Rosengarten, the second round pick, came in his first snap. Chris Jones is lining up against him, all pro defensive tackle. Roger Rosengarten gets blown by. It's a difficult assignment. I get it. What did you think of the decision by the Ravens to use a rotation on the offensive line, or on the right tackle spot at least? And what did you think of this group as a whole? We're seeing Andrew Voorhees at left guard. We saw McCary and Rosengarten at right tackle, and we saw Daniel Falele at right guard.
I think they were good in pass protection. I think a lot of what we saw in the preseason carried over to tonight's game, where not a whole lot of push for the run game. I mean, the longest run for Derrick Henry tonight was 9 yards. I think you want to tip your cap to that Chiefs defense. They tackled well. They pursued. They were in the gaps that they were supposed to. But just looking at some of the advanced stats, Paul, I think was pretty interesting. Obviously, the Chiefs, I believe, blitzed like 43% of the time in that AFC Championship game. And that was obviously a similar game script for them, where they were ahead for most of that game, for basically all of it. Tonight, just 23.5% of the time. And it felt like even more than that, they were dropping 8 into coverage in some of those obvious passing situations, like late first half, the final drive, where it was almost like Steve Spagnuolo was saying, we want to get as many guys in Lamar's eye line as possible, and also have these guys just kind of hovering in case Lamar tries to scramble. I mean, like, Lamar was obviously a scrambling demon out there again today, but wasn't really able sometimes to break past that first or second line of kind of dropping defenders. He had a scramble rate tonight of 17.6%, which I think is even higher than what it was last year, which was a career high for him. I think probably, even though Lamar, finished with close to 300 yards passing, it was still kind of disappointing that it's just the familiar sight of him dropping back, 5-step drop, hitching, nothing there, hitching, nothing there, and then he's got to scramble. It's like, what? The Chiefs are going to have a great defense. Maybe this is just an anomaly, but it was disappointing that with as many weapons as the Ravens have in this receiving core, we think, it still was not a situation where this offense, this passing offense, looked like it was boom, 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 boom. The quick throws from Lamar were just getting the ball out in space, but not really threading the ball downfield, not really finding those second level guys over the middle. Mark Andrews was a non-factor for most of the game. Rashad Bateman, obviously, maybe it was just him running vertical routes that Lamar ditched because the pass protection was not holding up especially well. But I think definitely room for improvement for this passing offense. And a lot of it, again, came out of structure. And I think that's something you're always going to be able to rely on, but you want more, because you need to have that, I think, to carry yourself past the finish line, carry yourself to the finish line in these games against these top tier teams.
Yeah, the veteran weapons that you mentioned, the Ravens are going to need more from, and it falls on everybody. It doesn't just fall on the players themselves, and part of it is the offense, part of it is the offensive line giving Lamar more time. But the 3 guys, Nelson Aguilar, 1 catch for 6 yards on 1 target. Mark Andrews, 2 catches on 2 targets for 14 yards. He did have a big gain that was wiped away, I believe, by one of those illegal formation penalties. Rashad Bateman's 2 catches on 5 targets. The long drive in the final drive, the long catch down the sideline for 38 yards, of course, inflating that total. but those guys are going to need, the Ravens are just going to need more from those guys going forward. Lamar,
Paul,
I
I
will
think
say,
one of the sorry, Paul, let me cut in for a second. I think one of the more interesting contradictions of this Lamar performance, average time to throw 3.03 seconds. That is like slowest in the NFL type category. That's like Justin Fields type category. That's early career
that's
Lamar type category.
him
But
dancing around
only
though.
no, I know that's what I'm saying. But like the second part of that is the average air yards per attempt, which again is like how often are you pumping the ball downfield? 6.5 air yards per attempt. That is way, way low. That would have been like one of the 4 or 5 lowest in the NFL last year. So you would at least like to see this correlation between longer average time to throw and a higher air yards per attempt. And obviously a lot of that I think is dropped down by the amount of screen passes and checkdowns and whatever that Lamar threw. But I don't think it's a winning formula to have a guy take as long as he did to throw. Obviously, a lot of that is the function of the offensive line and Chris Jones, but also be as relatively conservative as he was. I mean, the Ravens didn't have like a 20-yard gain until I think the third or fourth quarter, right?
Yeah. I mean, the lack of explosive plays, you tweeted out at one point, I think it was halftime, that the Chiefs had several and the Ravens had zero. I mean, you need structured explosive plays, guys who are schemed to get open, time for them to get open, and Lamar to deliver the ball at that point. It can't all come out of structure with Lamar just dancing back there, figuring something out and heaving it and chucking and saying, one of the Zays will be open down there somewhere. Screw it. Lamar, I will say, for all of the talk that we did about a skinny Lamar being faster, he lowered his shoulder at one point. You remember that in the first half? Maybe trying to send a message that hey, skinny Lamar can still deliver a hit every now and again. Maybe don't do that in week 1 of the regular season when you don't need to, and it doesn't really matter in a second quarter run. But he was, I think we could say, undoubtedly faster in this game. He at least felt much more comfortable in his ability to run the ball in this game. 122 yards on the ground, 7.6 average. As you mentioned, 75% of those were scrambles probably, but he very much felt more comfortable in his ability to run today. And there was one run in the second quarter where he just took it right up the gut and danced up the middle for like a 12-yard gain that I thought, all right, this looks like the pre-2023 Lamar Jackson. And maybe that means he has to take and absorb a few more hits, but he is going to run the ball as much as he ever has maybe this season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how well the Ravens do in week 2 against that Raiders defense, which is a little bit better, I think, than people give it credit for. I think they finished top 10 in DVOA last year. They obviously got Max Crosby, who is going to be just as relentless as Chris Jones and probably play even more snaps because that dude just does not come off the field. And then you've got Christian Wilkins in the middle, another guy who is a high impact pass rusher, probably will be very involved in some of those pass rush games with Max Crosby. Malcolm Kuntz, I think, is their secondary edge rusher who had a nice year last year. So, we've talked about it. If we talked about it once, we've talked about it a million times. This is a offensive line that's going to have to learn the hard way. And I think they should be proud of what they did, especially after, that first quarter or those first 20 to 25 minutes. How much of that was the Chiefs maybe tiring a little bit? How much of that was that, their interior pass rush easing a little bit on the accelerator so that they could have eyes on Lamar at all times? Who knows? But it just felt like a classic Lamar against the Chiefs kind of game in all the good and bad ways.
Yeah, let's talk about the defense, because this defensive performance was certainly not as impressive as the one that the Ravens put up in the AFC Championship game, where they held that Chiefs team to 17 points and shut them out in the second half. They did flash at times. It's first-year defensive coordinator in Zach Orr. You're changing some pieces in the secondary along the defensive line. Patrick Mahomes finished with close to 300 passing yards in this game. He still had a very productive day through the air. David Ojabo got in on the action with a nice sack at one point. What did you see from this defense going up against another formidable offense and facing first-round pick Xavier Worthy, who scored twice?
Yeah. First of all, let's bump our brakes on the Xavier Worthy hype. All right. I think you or I could have gotten open on that touchdown. You or I
Yeah,
definitely could not have scored on the end around. So credit to him. But this was to see all the just like disingenuous. How did the NFL let the Chiefs get Xavier Worthy? Let's see him like run a 9 route, by
yeah,
someone
yeah.
before we crown this guy as the next
I
Tyreek
mean,
Hill. He's
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 got
still 165 pounds.
yeah, he's got Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, and he has Andy Reid as his play caller. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, you have everything set up for you at that point. You're like Steve Kerr on the Chicago Bulls. I mean, you just have but he did. I mean, he showed off the speed. He was drafted a few spots ahead of Nate Wiggins, who I didn't see play on defense at all. I saw him used as a
He
gunner
he
in special teams.
he definitely played at least one snap. Maybe at
Okay.
a certain point when you're talking, Paul, I can try to find some
Yeah.
snap counts. But
I saw him
it was
used as a
definitely
gunner.
Jalen Armour Davis. It was definitely Jalen
Yes.
Armour Davis ahead of him on that outside corner pecking order.
And the Ravens did not use many of their rookies at all in this game. Nate Wiggins and Roger Rosengarten were really the only ones. 5 rookies were inactive for this game. So if you were hoping to get a very early look at this draft class, it's a testament to how deep the Ravens roster is, that they are not relying on their rookies this early and that they have ready-made replacements at every single spot, pretty much. But you just haven't seen anything from the rookies, and there's plenty of time. We are not judging a draft class by week 1. It just is, a slow start. It was a slow summer for a lot of these rookies, and it is now extended over into the regular season.
Snap update for you, Paul. A little bit surprising. So Nate Wiggins got 15 snaps tonight. Let me see if it breaks down into the distribution by quarter. So he played just the 1 snap in the first quarter, about 6 in the second, 2 in the third, and then it looks like about 8 in the fourth quarter. So
Were all of
he
those
actually
on
got more.
defense? Or does that
Yeah, this is defensive snaps. Yeah.
Okay.
So he actually did outsnap Jalen Armour Davis tonight. Maybe the biggest surprise in terms of just play time distribution are Darius Washington, just the 5 snaps. It looked like to me, again, this is just kind of a quick, not really, not too intense breakdown of what I just saw. It seemed to me like the Ravens were more comfortable having Kyle Hamilton be in the slot and then having Eddie Jackson be there as the third safety, as opposed to having Kyle Hamilton as the deep safety and Darius Washington in the slot. So a little bit of a surprise there.
Also, Darius Washington, real quick on Darius Washington, nice pass break up there. He and I may be the same height, but he can certainly outleap me. I'll tell you that.
He's incredible in the air. Shout out to Jalen Armour Davis also, who very, very nice guy, and was talking him up before the game in the locker room on Tuesday or Monday, and watched him come through. Interesting to see how the Ravens handled their playtime situation at linebacker. I wrote a story about a month ago, I think at this point, about how the Ravens might embrace dime looks, which is 6 defensive backs on the field at once. I don't know how accurately that played out, but it was interesting to see us go from a situation where Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen last year were dependably 100% snap guys. Today, Roquan, of course, played all 50 snaps. I don't think his best game. Trenton Simpson on the field for 34 snaps, and Malik Harrison got 15, but some of those were obviously on the edge there. So the Ravens did get a little bit funky with how they use stuff. John Harbaugh said that the Ravens had to take those 2 timeouts in the second half because of how, I guess, effectively or how dramatically the Chiefs were changing their own personnel stuff, and they didn't feel like they had the right people to match. Maybe some of that was the Ravens not having their own, affairs in order and having to call timeouts to get the right guys on the field, or maybe another guy on the field. On the Chiefs touchdown to Xavier Worthy, didn't see Marlon Humphrey in the locker room post game, so could not ask him exactly what the hell happened there. But Eddie Jackson graciously took our dumb questions and basically said, there was a, the coverage busted. He didn't really go into too much detail. I asked if that late motion by the running back out of the backfield to that strong side of the formation where I think there were already 3 receivers, kind of fouled up the coverage distributions. And he said, we just didn't do what we had to do. But it seemed like that was what happened because there was obviously no one there behind Marlon Humphrey once he converged on that running back who was approaching the flat. So it's not like this is a situation where we can say, oh, a Mike McDonald defense would have been better prepared, because counterfactuals like that are dumb and stupid. But obviously, there were situations tonight on both sides of the ball where it felt like the Ravens needed to have been better prepared, needed better coaching so that they could put themselves in a situation where they wouldn't shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, there were flubs on both sides. I think of the 4th down play where Zay Flowers is literally kneeling down in the backfield and is able to fool the Chiefs secondary and get open in the flat. And the Ravens aren't able to convert because it looks like on the replay, maybe Nelson Aguilar cuts towards the middle of the field. And I don't know exactly, without knowing the play, we don't know if he was supposed to block the guy in front of him there or if he's just supposed to be a distraction there. But there was some miscommunication there. So it looked like a team that is playing in week 1 that has been going through 3 preseason games without almost every single one of their starters playing.
And didn't that 4th down failure happen on the drive where the Ravens were moving things pretty well to start, and then you get the Rashad Bateman offensive pass interference and things just kind of go in reverse? They obviously get themselves in a situation where they can go for it on what I think was 4th and 2. But these things tend to snowball, and that was what was so impressive about the Ravens last year, was that they would just take leads and say, it's your turn, opponents, to screw things up. We're just going to be back here coasting, cooling, chilling. And tonight they definitely were not as finely tuned as they had to be. There were things that need improvement, and you expect that in week 1, but for it to happen on this stage against this team after everything that Ravens fans have been through over the past 7+ months, definitely disappointing. I think for anyone who had an emotional investment in this game.
Yeah, I think it was a 4th and 3 at midfield for that completion to Zay Flowers. Jonas, it is so late on the East Coast here. It's 1:45. Any final thoughts in this loss tonight, 27-20 to the Kansas City Chiefs? We did see on the injury front, Kyle Van Noy left the game with an eye injury. And did you see him come back in this game, or have you heard anything?
No, I think he was ruled out.
Okay. At the time,
I didn't see him in the locker room.
On the NBC game, they did say he was questionable, but I wasn't sure if he was ever officially ruled out. So you hope he's okay. That looked like kind of a scary moment where it was a play which the Ravens were penalized for, I believe, for roughing the passer. And he kind of went low. So hopefully he is okay. Any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up, Jonas?
I mean, I think I'll probably be writing tonight about the possibility of a rematch and just what the Ravens can take away from this. But I feel like that line of thinking is just like over idealistic navel gazing. Like, oh, how sick would it be if the Ravens and Chiefs met again? But first of all, both these teams have to get into the playoffs, and then they have to win enough games where there's only 2 teams left in the AFC. And it's not as much of a sure thing as like the NBA playoffs.
Yeah.
Where it's during the Warriors' heyday, it was going to be the Warriors as the 1 seed, and then I don't know whoever would have been like the Thunder as the 2 seed or the 3 seed, and you were just kind of counting down the days until these teams meet again after having already played 3 or 4 times in the regular season. And football's a funny, fallible game, and as cool as it would be to see these guys go again, and as interesting as Lamar is at the podium when he's kind of tweaked by reporters asking him about how the Chiefs are his kryptonite, I don't know if I would say that the odds that these teams play each other again are going to be more than 15%, 20%.
Yeah, there's so much we haven't seen. We haven't seen 30 NFL teams play yet. So like we have no idea what this season is going to look like. There are 16 games left in the regular season before we even get down there. I mean, it could happen, but it is just so far away. And it just, it feels like that at this point, I don't want to see these two teams meet again because we've seen how the last two meetings have gone, and it's just frustrating football on Baltimore side. Two different stories in two different games, but still frustrating nonetheless. I will drop this final note here, Jonas, that my score prediction, if you go back and listen to the pregame podcast, was 27 Chiefs, Ravens 20.
And that was a score prediction that you thought long and hard about before making
long
it, right?
and hard about. I definitely didn't change it right before. Actually, you walked in the room and you said you got a prediction. And I said, I totally forgot we do score predictions because it's been so long since we have done this. And so I was going to pick what you picked, which was 24-17 Chiefs. And I just threw out there, all right, I'll just add 3 to each score. And I ended up with 27-20. And it just could not have been a better start to my season, personally. At Jonas_Shaffer is Jonas's Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano. Enough navel gazing, as you would say, Jonas. At All Banner Sports is where you can catch all of our good work, and the BaltimoreBanner.com. Subscribe $1 for 6 months. Jonas is going to stay up late to deliver awesome content for you. You will read tomorrow morning. Hopefully, you're going to bed at this point. Although we do have 424 people watching. Thanks so much for tuning in live at 1:48 on the East Coast. Giannahan is also in Kansas City.
I don't think these people watching are on the East Coast.
Yeah, who knows? They could be anywhere. Kai Boone, Giannahan are also there as well. And we have plenty more coverage on the BaltimoreBanner.com. We will be back with a preview of the Ravens and the Raiders in week 2. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good